Chosheva, Rosh Chabura, the Menal, Moisefia, Moira Rabbeisai. It's a tremendous privilege to come to this part of the world and come from a Mokum Torah, to come to a Mokum Torah. Each time I come here, there are more and more moisters here. The Rebbeinu should help that it should continue to grow in a very fruitful and meaningful way, Be'ez Hashem.
Amen.
I must be honest, before one comes to a place, it's difficult to know who the Olam is and what one speaks about. So I chose a general lineage, something which is an Ador, something to do with Ador, something to do with the Zman, the Avodas HaZman. So I'll share with you a few interesting points. It's a beautiful vort, a beautiful taich in a Chazal. Chazal tell us that when Haman came to Achashverosh, Haman said to Achashverosh that Yeshnoi Am Echad. Yeshnoi Am Echad, there's one nation. And Chazal dash in the pasuk Yeshnoi Am Echad. What's the extra words? Echad. So he says there's a nation, Am Echad, a nation who says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So what's the significance of that? Because the nation who says that, what's the significance? So I once saw a beautiful pshat from Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky. He said it's well known. He said when there was a blood libel in Damascus before World War I, so there was a very famous Askin in England, very wealthy Askin called Sir Moses Montefiore, and he was brought over from England, and he went to the king of Syria, no less, and the king said to him, I don't understand. He said, you're from England, so why are you coming from a Jew who's in a prison in Damascus? He says that, if a Syrian non-Jew was sentenced to death, do you think a Gentile from India would come along and rush over and ask? He says, well, why are you coming? Well, what's it all about? And he says, Haman wanted to discover what is the secret here. What is the secret here? Why are Jews? Why do you even care for each other? Why is there such a concern? Why is it when one eats ill something? What's it all about? And then he said he discovered the secret. The secret is that it's a nation who says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That we're all connected. We're all connected with the Shema. And he told them an amazing story. He said when he was during World War II when he had to escape. Then he was on a train in Bukharia, and he said he had no ticket. It was a time wartime. And he stopped the ticket, so to speak, ran out at a certain station, and he got out of the station. He doesn't know where to turn, and where'd you go? And so he thought, if I hang around here, it's bad news. I'm gonna have to hide somewhere. So I'm gonna have to hide somewhere. But if I hide and they find me, it's gonna be even worse. And looks up and down, and he sees an elderly man at the end of the station there, polishing shoes. He looks at him, he thought, just maybe he's Jewish, who knows? But if he isn't, I'm in trouble. So he goes up to this man, and he says, can you polish my shoes? He gives him some money, and while he's polishing his shoes, he starts humming to himself, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. And this fellow polishing shoes says, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusay Le'olam Va'ed. Oh, I eat. So he says, come with me. Takes him to his house. And he says, something he says with tears in his eyes? He says, I couldn't speak a word of Bukhari, and he couldn't speak a word of Polish. And I was in his house for 12 days. And he looked after me like a father or mother would look after a child. Because we're both Eden. And the only thing we had in common was Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We have in common. I'll tell you an amazing story. It's an amazing story. Usually I like it when my wife is here when I say this story over, because people don't believe the story. 2 years ago, I arrived at the passport office here in Florida, in Miami Beach, and I come it's my turn to come there. You've got to be very careful, and they start asking you questions, where you're staying and how long you're here and what you're doing here. So I answer all the questions, and then the man looks at me and says, what's happening in England? Strange question. So I said, it's cold and wet. He says, no. What's happening with the protests, the Palestinian protests? I thought, watch it, just careful, because you never know what, if you answer wrongly, you know. So I said, you know, I'm an absent-minded scholar who lives up north. I don't really have too much. He says to me, I'm Jewish. I said, really? He said, yes. He says, I was born in Ukraine. This is, people are piling up at the back. I said, do you remember anything about being Jewish? He said, yes. All I remember is that when I was a kid, all my friends called me shit. And he used to take me to the bathroom, turn me upside down, and that's it, and abuse me for being Jewish. And that's why I've got nothing to do with being Jewish. And he looks at me, waiting for me to say something. I said to him, okay. I said, do you know what Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is? Have you heard those words? He says, I know what Hashem means, but I've actually, sounds vaguely familiar, but no, I don't know what it is. So I'm holding a passport. I said, would you let me into the country without the passport? No way. I said, well, you want to get to heaven, you need a passport. And the passport is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. I don't know how to say it. I said, let's do it now. I had such fun. I said to him, okay, pick up your right hand. Put it on your eyes. And say it after me. And he puts on his eyes, and the cue's getting bigger and bigger. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Leil V'Oed. I said, you've now got your passport. I said, but let me give you one more thing. I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I said, keep this in your pocket. If you're ever in trouble, just take it out and say it. And that was it. And away. What we have in common is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But the point is that Echad is the Achdus. The Manas Alevi, the Baal HaChadoidi, says that when Haman came along and said, it's the most opportune time now to attack Klal Yisrael. And Achashverosh says, look, I don't want to back a loser. If I fight a battle, I'm going to make sure we're going to win. And everybody who's ever started up with the Jews has lost. I'm not going to do it. And he says, you'll manage now. Why will you manage now? Because there's a lot of machalikas going on. There's a lot of difference of opinion, and people are falling out with each other and getting upset with each other. And therefore, Yeshnoi Am Echad, a nation who's supposed to be one, they are mefuzat u'mefeirat. There's terrible machlekas. You're not going to get there. You're not going to get there. I want to tell you a story. The most amazing story. One of the most amazing stories with the most powerful lessons. Somebody gave me a book. It's called Our Man in Jerusalem, Our Man in Yerushalayim, written by Nachman Zeltzer. And in his introduction, he says it's written about a Yerushalmi, a Jew from Yerushalayim, a Yid from Yerushalayim called Rabbi Yisrael Gelis. And he came to interview him the first time, and Yisrael Gelis says, I want to show you something. He said, years back, after 1967, when they got the Kaisel back, they're carrying out archaeological diggings. And they found, because they hadn't been, Eretz Yisrael, the country hadn't been under their rule for many, many years. Well, it never been. It's the first time, and they could do it. And they found near the walls, they found rocks which were basically the large cannonballs which had been hurled by the Romans at the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Can you imagine? They actually found those, because they could see. They were all by the wall. They were dug there. Some were complete, some were empty. And he said, they gave me, the story how he got it is not relevant to the Shia, but he said, my father got hold of one of them, and he said, would you like to hold it? And he says, I held it, and I suddenly, shivers went up my back. This is a stone. He says, I close my eyes, and I look at the stone, and I imagine this stone being loaded onto a catapult by the Roman legions. And I could hear the shouts in battle, and I can imagine the groans of the wounded, and this is a stone. This was a stone that was thrown at the time of the Churban, and I'm actually touching it. Real story. This is real. When I saw that story, I thought, there must be a lesson here. And I think the lesson is like this. We are nearly 2,000 years in Golus. When we were kids, we were always told that every mitzvah that you do puts another brick in the Beis Hamikdash. Every word of Torah. How big is it? How big is the Beis Hamikdash going to be? How big is it going to be? I mean, we talk about how many billions of words of Torah and mitzvahs and davening. So why hasn't it been built? And I think the answer is that's why sinas chinam, when we hate a person, we say hateful words to people, we hurt people. It's worse than other averas. Person Nachmanitzon does other averas, God forbid does other averas. So okay, does avera and he'll reap the shuv on it. But every time we do avera, which brought it, it's like we are taking a stone and throwing it on the building, on the Beis Hamikdash, which is being rebuilt, and knocking bricks over. So other averas don't do that, but that's what sinas chinam does. And if we would imagine, it's like a catapult being thrown. It's a very, very powerful, very, very powerful point. The whole lesson of Purim is the Yeshnei Amechad, that we have to put aside. You know, the Rebbeinu Shloim didn't want to make one prototype Jew. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made us different. 12 Shvatim, and we're different, and we live in different communities, and we have different backgrounds, and we have to learn to respect, and we have to learn to not to tolerate, to respect, and to see the best in everybody, and to pick up the best in everybody. And if we criticize people, and if we talk disparagingly about people, and if we talk about that, then we are literally guilty. We are literally guilty of extending the galus. That's why it says in the Megillah, says the Manos Alevi, Leil kenois es haYehudim, bring them together, bring them, let them come together, bring them together. I want to read you out a story, because I think this story has such a powerful lesson. To see what it means, how you can throw a stone, and the damage that you can do to a person if one's not careful. Got a very, very long story short. There was a young Satmar Chassid who went to daven in a shtibel somewhere, and he saw somebody, a Yid called Rabbi Ephraim, whatever his name was, a Torah Yid, and his Yid always came on time to davening, and he gave tzedakah nicely, and he sat and learned afterwards. And this young man was watching this elderly person, or this middle-aged person, and one day says to him, he says, tell me, there must be a story behind it, but I'm so impressed with your Avodas Hashem. He says, I daven that my children should be like you one day. And this man went white, went absolutely white. And he says, what's it? He says, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story of my life. He says, I wasn't always like that. I was a very successful businessman, making millions, losing millions. I would come to davening whenever I came in and I went out, and whatever, my day was business meetings. One day, someone announced in shul that Isaac, one of the chevra there called Isaac, had been discharged from hospital, and anybody who wants to say goodbye to him should say goodbye to him, because he's got days left. And Isaac was very well known. He was a local electrician. He was an electrician in town, and everybody used his services. And he'd been battling the machla, the illness, Rahman al-Islam, and he's had a few days left. Of course, everybody said they're going along, so they had to make a road to, they had to book him when they want to go in. So this Rabbi Ephraim goes up to the fellow in charge, and the fellow in charge said, I don't have to tell this to you, but Isaac has sent a message. He's prepared to see everybody in town besides you, and no way under any circumstances should you go to him. Isaac went to him. He said, no, I'm going to go to him. He comes to him, and as soon as he comes in, this Isaac, or Yitzchak, whatever his name is, turns his face to the wall, and says, I can't look at you, please leave. And he says, tell me, what happened? What happened? Why is that? And he says, do you not remember that Erev Shabbos? He says, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, one Erev Shabbos at 2 o'clock, you called me up, it was in winter, to fix a flickering fluorescent in a dining room. And I told you I don't work on Friday afternoon. I don't work Friday afternoon. So he said to me, look, and I gave him another number. He said to me, look, don't throw your Frumkeiten on Yena's Cheshbon. You're going to ruin my whole Shabbos. I've got guests coming. I've got no lighting in my house. You're going to ruin my whole Shabbos because of your Frumkeiten. Don't be ridiculous. I was persuaded. I went along. I came there. I discovered that fluorescent wasn't in the dining room. Was in the hall. Was in the hall. I worked in for half an hour. I located the problem, fixed it. How much do I owe you? I said, look, it's out of hours. And the out of hours call out is $300. Man says, you sugar, are you crazy? No way in the world. And he pushes $150 into my hand and says, you should know, this is too much as well. Goodbye. I didn't say a word to him, he says. I didn't say a word to him. Isaac said, I didn't answer you back. And I thought to myself, one day I will somehow charge you a little bit extra and get the money back. But that wasn't the end of the story. This Isaac says, I came to Mincha that day and I saw you there. And I didn't want you to think that I was upset with you. So I came up to you to wish you a good Shabbos. And I said to you, by the way, is everything okay? And he says, well, you didn't do me much of a favor. Didn't really need you anyway, because the lighting was outside. Lighting was outside. And I heard that, didn't answer back. And I walked away. And as I walked away, he turns around to his boys and says, Kinderlach, learn nicely. Because one day, you'll land up to be an electrician like Isaac. He said, that killed me. That killed me. And he says, you should know one thing, he says, I have not been able to forget that. The pain I still feel till this day. I still feel the pain. I cannot get rid of it. I can't. And this man burst out crying. And he said, look, you're leaving the world soon. And what's going to happen? And Isaac said, look, I cannot tell you truthfully that I'm moichel you. I can't, because the dagger is still there. The pain is still there. What you did to me then is still there. But if you promise me, you will carry out 10 minutes of introspection a day, which we call Musa, and you'll think about it and how you treat people, how you treat your family, how you treat your clients, how you treat other people, then I'm hoping that when I get to Shemayim, I'll look at you differently and I'll be moichel you. But otherwise, there's nothing to talk about. That was it. A few days later, Isaac is not here anymore. And he says, I turned my life around when I heard that. I became so much more careful. But I never knew, was it accepted? And when you came to me, he said to this young man today, he said to me that you're davening, that your children should be like me. He says, now I realize it. And I want to bring this out because we have to be so careful with people. Sometimes, especially if we move up the lab in anything, in any way, whether a person's in business, whether a person's in a basic medrash, and somebody asks you a kasha and you don't like the teretz, whatever it may be, how careful one has to be, the caution one has to be, that words can destroy. And one has to think to oneself before one says it, or even after one says it. Think in your mind, try and remember this image of the Roman legions with a stone catapult coming along and throwing off. Every mitzvah you do builds up bricks, and you can throw off a brick. I don't want to run over my time, so I'll tell you an amazing story, and I'm going to finish with it. An amazing story. I had the schus in the 9 days just before Tisha B'Av to co-lead a group of 85 Sem girls to Europe, to Poland, and to the ghettos, and to the Botei Chaim, the concentration camps. And you can imagine it was filled with inspirational moments. But there was one moment I'll never forget. One moment I'll never forget. And the moment I'll never forget is the following. He says, we came to the Beis HaKvaros outside Warsaw. And this is an amazing Beis HaKvaros. Number one, the sheer size, there are 250,000 kvarim there in our Beis HaKvaros. Secondly, he was buried there. But thirdly, is that it's completely untouched. The Germans didn't destroy it. And they had every reason to destroy it. Because the kids from the ghetto used to smuggle in tunnels, actually not in tunnels. The kids in the ghetto, Barry, listen to this one. How did they get food? They had sewages, and the sewage came out in the basic forest, and the kids used to go along through the tunnels and come out. They showed us where the kids came out. Can you imagine? Where the kids came out and used to bring food and smuggle the food back in again. They had places where people hid. It wasn't touched. And no one understood it. The only Beis HaKvaros means the only place where people are buried which wasn't destroyed. And the fellow with me, Rabbi Yossi Cohen, told over a story. He said, this Beis HaKvaros was built in 1806, totally empty. The first person who was buried the wrong way around. The Minig Yisrael is, one shouldn't know these things, but the Minig Yisrael is you bury people with their feet towards Yerushalayim. That means when the Tchias HaMeisim, he gets up and goes to Yerushalayim. And they buried the person the wrong way around. The Rav at that time was the Chemde Shleima, one of the Goyim in the Chemde Shleima. And the Chemde Shleima says, you can't turn him, you can't move him around. But I am now paskening that every other person who dies in this Beis HaKvaros has to be buried the same way, not to embarrass this dead person. Imagine the family come along years later and they see everyone is buried one way and their great-grandfather isn't. And they're going to think maybe there's something wrong with him. Maybe there's a reason why I wasn't. In honor of this person, every single person has to. When I heard that story, I thought to myself, what does that mean? You're careful about the feelings of a person, and because of that, albeit, what is it? There's only gravestones there. That feeling that you had has protected 250,000 helpless tombstones. Can you imagine what protection we would have if we were only a little bit more careful about other people? And I think this is the message of Adar. This is the message of Leil K'nois Es HaYehudim. Let's come together. Let's come together. Let's learn to respect each other. Let's learn. I always come back to Gateshead after being here, and people say to me, "What did you see there?" I say, "I'll tell you. I don't know why I saw there. You want to look at the pictures? Look at the pictures. But I'll tell you what I learned there. I learned there what it means to greet a person nicely. You walk into a shul and you see people walk into a shul. The least they get is a hand slap or a this or a this. There's such a warmth. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And I said, we have to learn. Every single community in the world, every shul, every community, there is so much to learn for each other. Leil K'nois Es HaYehudim. Hashem should help. That we should take this seriously. We are currently living in the Eist Tzara, and at times of tremendous tzara. And if we realize how the extra caution not to upset another Yid, not to talk badly about another Yid, and not to throw, let's call it proverbial rocks, which can completely destroy a person. The B'nai will help. That will come to a time where it will be like Yehudim, with the coming of Mashiach. Amen.